What we'll do now is we'll just get in the room virtually the next members of our panel. And while we do that, I'm just going to let you know that a number of you apparently have been asking for copies of the presentations. We're just letting you know that we can send it to you if you've requested it once we release the report, once TAC, releases the report in a week to give time for the release to the media. The report apparently has a lot more detail in it. So if you download it from the MUARC website, and clearly that'll be up on the website in a week's time, you'll get all the detail there. But if you specifically request a copy of any presentations, we can get those to you. Got lots of terrific questions from you rolling in, and I'll try and get to as many of those as I can. But what I'll do now is I'll just introduce to you the members of our next panel. And I think they're being loaded up right now. You should be able to see them. There, most of them are. And as I introduce you, what I'll do is I'll just ask you to raise your hands. I think I've just got a message saying, I'm not quite sure if we have, yes, whether we've got Soames here or not, but we'll find out. But look, let me just introduce you to our next panel. This is where we get the view of the road safety experts and the practitioners, their response to what they just heard in this important bit of research. And also, I'll get you to raise your hands and say hi, and also turn on your video, please, so that we can see you. Michael Fitzharris is there in the MUARC studio. He's occupying the big desk there. Michael Newsteig is here as well, Director of Road Safety Programs and Policy at the TAC. And Michael's in our big glamorous studio as well there. Say hello. Michael.
Good.
Also, we have Professor Claes Tingvall, who has been mentioned in dispatches already. Are you there, Klaus? There you are. You're very dark there. I don't know if you can somehow make it a little brighter for us to see you. No, stay where you are. All I would suggest is just raise the brightness on your computer. If you're looking through a computer, just the brightness there that you've got on your keyboard, and that should illuminate your face a little bit more. We'll see you better. The Director of Road Safety Programs and Policy at the, who's the Chair of the Academic Expert Group for the 3rd Global Ministerial Conference on Road Safety in Sweden, and who is zooming from Sweden, where I'm sure it is pretty dark. Look, we can see you, so don't fuss about it too much. And Dr. Soames Job, Global Lead Road Safety and Head of Global Road Safety Facility from the World Bank, who is zooming from Queensland. I think Soames is the one that we might be missing at the moment. And Robin Seymour is joining us as well, Deputy Secretary, Network Planning, Head of Road Safety Victoria with the Department of Transport. Robin, great to see you there as well. Thanks for joining us all here. And Kane, just send me a text when we know what's happening with Soames. So, look, you've all been working on road safety issues for decades, and you've seen, I'm sure, a great deal of progress in all of this. Give us a sense of what you've seen as sort of the key thing, if you can identify just one, the key thing that's made a real difference in terms of the work that you do and the research that you've done. Yes. Progress in terms of preventing fatalities. We can see Soames there. Great to have you on board. Klaus, I might start with you if I can. I just need you to unmute yourself before you start.
Yeah, okay. Well, good morning. Calling from Europe, Sweden. First of all, I think we all should realize that this is a unique study, because many of these sort of gigantic studies that we are looking at now normally looks at is just sort of collecting a lot of data and hoping to find something out. That's pretty common around the world. But this study was designed to really answer a number of questions. And I think, first of all, it's unique. Second, there's so many things now that will come out as a result. And I'm sure it's going to be used worldwide as an example of what you really can find out when you're doing such a thorough study that this one has been used here. The other thing, just shortly, is it just shows so clearly the enormous mismatch between the human and the technology surrounding us. It's so clear, and it's so important to focus on both things at the same time. And that's where the big contribution comes. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good observation. Robin Seymour, can I come to you?
Thanks, Virginia. It was fantastic to hear the work that the team have been doing on this study. And I guess from my perspective, it really reinforced that there's no one solution to help us address the trauma that we see on the road, and that we need to have a very integrated approach across the system in terms of how we then address it, which goes to the point that Libby was talking about the value of the road safety partnership that we have in Victoria, and ensuring that we are really, as a group, clear about the impact that we have in terms of really addressing the trauma on our roads. I think one of the things that was pretty horrifying to hear in the data was that 36% of people seriously injured, that there was no system criteria met in those crashes, which I guess illustrates the fact that there's still a lot of work for us to do in relation to things like our road environment, the speeds and our speed management. And Libby talked about the importance of speed limits, and Michael talked about how even speeding just a little bit has pretty devastating consequences. I was also interested in the fact that despite some people being in 5-star vehicles, that the design criteria of those vehicles don't meet the requirements of our road environment, which also sort of speaks to that important work that we need to do around vehicle safety standards and the great technology that we're starting to see come through, and further work needed to try and bring those through our fleets, like auto emergency braking and lane keep assist, but also then what that means in terms of the work we need to do around our road environment, particularly when you think about the fact that half of the participants didn't have time to brake. And so what that means in terms of what they might hit. And so I think that really speaks to that balanced approach and ensuring that we address all of those elements of the system and continue to do that strongly in Victoria.
Yep. Thank you, Robin. Good to hear from you. Klaus, great. I'm sorry, Dr. Symes-Joe, great to see you there. And I'm sure you've got your sound working now. Can I just get a quick response from you? What was the thing that most struck you from what you just saw and heard from that research?
Thanks, Virginia. I have been on all along, just not visible. I thought it's a fantastic piece of research. And to me, one of the things that really highlights is the power of the TAC in this. I used to be head of road safety for New South Wales, and as Sam pointed out, Victoria is the leading state, and almost always is the leading state. We did manage for a few years to actually get a little bit better result than Victoria. And I think what it really tells me about the TAC is people would say, oh, that's amazing because they have the TAC. And I think that is why Victoria is leading now, because it has the TAC and because of the partnership it has with roads, with police, with justice, etc. And so I think Victoria is recognised as the general leader in Australia, and it should be for those reasons. And this kind of research is one of the reasons for that powerful leadership. To me, a few specifics jumped out about it. First of all, if you look at this, what are the most important factors? Speed. I think speed is just so fundamental. Speed is the toxin in crashes. It's what creates the force that does the damage. So if we don't manage speed and don't manage the consequences of speed, we just won't succeed. So I felt that was fundamental. I think it's also incredibly important to appreciate the extent to which we need to focus on the things we can control. Speeds are among those, I think, as governments and as leaders in road safety, as well as community groups. I think the way we build the road network to focus onto providing a safer system for people and ultimately a safe system for people is powerful and compelling. And I think Klaus's leadership and TAC's continuation of that approach, and now it's spread to all of Australia, is an incredibly important piece of leadership. The other thing that I think we always need to maintain a focus on, and the data here point this out, is the importance of the greater severity of crashes in regional and remote areas. There is a tendency for everyone who's working on this leadership, who generally lives in Geelong or Melbourne and those kinds of places, and I live in a capital city and most of us do, to focus on the capital cities. But actually, rural dwelling people in Victoria and in every state of Australia have a higher risk of death or serious injury per population than metropolitan dwelling people, and often many fold higher. So I think bringing out the greater likelihood of death in a crash, the greater likelihood of more severe outcomes in a crash, for reasons which we can understand, again, in relation to speed as well as various other factors, mean that we really need to keep that focus on regional remote and deliberately resist the focus of where we are in the major capital cities.
Soames, thank you. Thanks so much for that. I want to turn to Michael Newstead. Michael, was there anything in this that surprised you, or does this just bear out everything that the direction the evidence has been pointing us in for some time?
Thanks for the question, Virginia. I just want to quickly say, before I say anything else, just to really express my congratulations to Michael. It's been an immense amount of work, and it's an amazing resource that we have that's going to help us out for many years now. And as Klaus has said, it's going to help us help the whole world with the questions we've been grappling. In terms of surprises for me, you're right. There's a lot in here that validates what we have known from previous research, validating the influence of speed and its role in crashes and severity of crashes. Quantifying the system gaps, I think, is really exciting. But for me, perhaps the thing that's really struck me the most is getting an insight into the complexity and the messiness of human situations. Every case, the 400 people, they've all come with very different situations and life stories that have brought them to that sharp end of the crash. And for me, that really sticks with me. We can try and address a whole range of performance failures, and we do, and that's really important. But for me, it's just acknowledging that humans are really messy. And the best efforts to educate and enforce and build an engineering system around the human, really, it's about recognising that humans are messy and that they fail, and that by putting that system in place and actually doing it successfully, which we have got in Victoria. We have places where we have a very good road, we have very good cars, and we've got a generally compliant driving population. And we saw no serious outcomes in our study. So that gives us such great hope that zero is really possible when we can pull those elements together and create that system.
Michael Fitzharris, let's come back to you and the work that you've done. And it is a quite remarkable bit of research. There's a great question that's come in here from Michael Hardiman, which brings us, right to the pointy end. We'll race to the end of all of our discussion, shall we? Get to the headline. Based on the findings of the study, what do you consider to be the most critical policy change that's necessary to reduce the road toll and the incidence of serious injury collision? So really, Michael, we're just sort of asking you to solve the whole problem for us if you can.
Well, can I have one in each of the pillars, please? I think treating it as a system is critical. I think, the issue of non-compliance, it's really critical because it's fundamental to the system and the system balance. So you can have all of the other things in place, but if we break the system boundary through non-compliance, that's something that's really critical across the board, in terms of speed, drug and alcohol. And, we're dealing also with people with addiction as well, and we need to think about addiction as a road safety concern. But from the safe driver perspective, because vehicle tech will pick up some of the issues with people, their error, their warning systems and so on. Perhaps in the future, the medical conditions and acute illness will help, but that's something that's important. So that's my safe driver request, please. The safe vehicle, I think, is something that's really critical. We need to do much more in terms of getting technology into our vehicles much faster. We need to look at ways to have some of the EU and UN global regulations streamlined into Australian cars much, much faster. We can't be sitting waiting for 5-6 years for things like AEB that have already been mandated in Europe through the UN system. We just can't wait. I see little point in doing regulatory impact statements for technologies that have been approved elsewhere. So that's pretty controversial because we know it takes around 25 years for the vehicle fleet to turn over. So we just have to do that improving vehicle, because what we're talking about is impact speed, and the vehicle can play a really key role, not just in crash tests, but also the active safety systems. And then, of course, we come to the road. I think fundamentally, when we talk about impact speed and the links upstream, it is, if we go to the source of where most of the problem is, it's local and C-class roads in rural Victoria, and we just need to get the speed limits right. So if I'm visiting a friend of mine out in Sutton Grange, I'm on the Sutton Grange Road for 10 kilometres, I'm prepared to lose 50 seconds to drop the speed limit to 80 to get to the Calder, which is a much higher grade, safer road that can sustain the speed limit. We need to have that conversation, and we need to have the conversation with the community about serious injury and the profound impact that it can have, and really re-gear the conversation to help people understand that road trauma is a really significant problem. But they're my three. I don't like to pick one, because that would be defying the idea, the very nature of the system itself.
Yes, fair observation. What are the odds, Michael, that you and I both have friends on Sutton Grange Road? That's completely bizarre. But let's go to the issue that was made clear in your research, and that almost everyone has touched on here, and that is the issue that rural people are dying and being seriously injured on rural roads, on their own roads. And in fact, the TAC held a conference on this last year. I was facilitating that one too, and it was made as clear as day. And yet, it was also as clear as day that if you took this to rural communities, Michael, you're unusual in that you say you're prepared to lose the 50 seconds to have the speed drop to 80. The consensus in the room was that the majority of people, those rural community members themselves, would not want to see that default speed limit of 100 dropped in any way. So how do you shift the dial on this? Who wants to start?
Oh, can I just make the point quickly, Virginia, that, what we're asking is those roads which people are on for a relatively short distance to understand that road can't be treated the same way as something like the Calder. And we need to have that understanding, that shift that with the community. And we also know that from our crash investigation, there were Facebook pages, there were newspaper stories, there were rallies in some of our crashes in rural locations. Communities do want these changes, because it's the local community member, the pillar of the community, the footy coach, the footy captain, the netballers, whoever, they're the ones who are dying. So I think we need to separate the idea of the higher speed, high traffic volume roads from the local road and start to have the conversation. But I always wonder who we speak to when we say who doesn't want it. The freight industry might not want it, but we're not talking about those type of roads. We're talking about the roads that are covered in trees and can't sustain 100. And you just need to look at two pictures of a 100-kilometre freeway versus a rural road, and you think, how on earth? And that's the conversation that we really need to have, because rural communities are touched and devastated, it's about having the conversation of understanding that the car can't protect them.
Absolutely. And yet at that TAC conference last year, the government representative in the room, the minister who was there, and I'll go to you on this, Robin Seymour, seemed to indicate that there was not going to be an appetite to take that argument out to rural communities. Do you think, picking up what Michael's saying there and carefully, parsing which roads, which C-class roads, and being specific about that, is there an argument that can be made and can be accepted?
So I guess there's two things that I'd say about that. One around the community and the community appetite. What we know from the market research we've done is there's pretty much a 50-50 split around who would support lowering speed limits and who would not support lowering speed limits. We know that women, younger people, people with dependents are much more willing to and consider lowering speed limits a good thing. Our middle-aged and older males in particular tend to be anti any reductions in speed limits. So there is this polarising issue, and so there is work that we need to do with community around understanding the impact speed has and what is an appropriate speed limit for different road environments. On the other side, around speed limits, 80k speed limits on regional roads. We have done quite a lot of work. There's more work to be done, but we have done quite a lot of work in looking at some of those roads and lowering those speed limits. So we know that 20% of those C-class roads in Eastern Victoria we've lowered to 80 k's an hour, and they have made a difference in terms of road trauma. We're running a trial on the Mornington Peninsula with the Mornington Peninsula Shire, running a trial on lowering speed limits. All of that work is really important in terms of those conversations with the community to understand actually the value and the impact in terms of the fact that, to Michael's point, that it might only take an extra 50 seconds and actually that's okay. It doesn't really impact people's lives in terms of giving up 50 seconds to ensure that they arrive safely. So I think there is a lot more work we need to do with communities, but I'm optimistic that we will continue to do that work, and we will continue to demonstrate the value in looking at some of those lower order roads and what's an appropriate sort of speed limit for the community in that context.
Would anyone else like to jump in there just before I go back to Michael? I've got a...
if I may, Virginia?
Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
I did... Let me start by saying, as a background, I'm a psychologist, and I think the psychology of how this happens is very important. I do think that what Robin and Michael have touched on are both very important things, that the community is devastated in specific instances, and it is rural people dying on rural roads. And to Robin's point about the surveys, so, you know, if we do a vox pop, if we see the media, you'd think 95% of people don't want a speed limit lowering, but actually it's not true. And commonly we find that surveys of the community will give a very different result from that listening to the noisy, the ones that turn up to say something. I think that's important to appreciate and important to communicate at a political level. The other thing I would highlight is the status quo matters. Whatever the speed limit now is on a road, you typically find that the majority of people will say this is about right, and then about as many people will say it's too high as say it's too low. You can then lower it 10 kilometres an hour, come back 2 years later and you'll get the same result. The majority think it's about right. About as many people think it's too high as think it's too low. So if you bite the bullet and make the change, community attitudes will move to it. I think we sometimes need to get in advance of that attitude rather than expect the attitude will shift before we have the courage to do anything. And I would say, and I think it's important psychologically to appreciate the same about enforcement. We need to get away from this view that we need to change attitudes and then behavioural change. It's just fundamentally a mistake to think that's the only way. If we force a change in behaviour, attitudes will shift to match the behaviour. And enforcement itself is one of the ways to do that. If we enforce speed limits very strongly, people come to believe speed limits are more important. So it's not the case that we need to go attitude to shift behaviour. If we can shift behaviour, we will improve the attitude to match that improved behaviour. And that's one of the psychological values of taking the broad approach of combining changing speed limits, education and enforcement as a nested set to create this. But the other thing I would highlight is we shouldn't think about speed management as just being about behaviour change through the people. Speeds can also be managed with good road infrastructure, with better use of roundabouts, better use of chicanes, speed humps, etc. And then you don't have the argument about its revenue raising, etc. So we need, when we come to thinking about managing speed, and it is fundamental that we get it right, we do need to think about the full suite of opportunities we have at our disposal to do that speed management.
Really good point, Soames. Klaus, did you want to jump in there as well?
Yeah, just add a few things, a couple of things that came out of the work of the ministerial conference that was held in Sweden in February. Two things there. I mean, our task in the expert group was really to zoom out, to look at a broader picture of mobility and link that to health, climate, and equity. And if you talk about speed and all these different kinds of important things in the community, you can see very clear link between it. Because if you look at things like climate, if you look at particles, noise, livability, feeling of security, if you can send your kids to school, and so many different things, they're all related to speed, actually. That's why traffic safety need and should get all the allies in all the other areas, rather than taking the sort of full, as you say, debate with the community that is just for safety. We need to have other sort of speed behavior out there, if I may call it so. Not from the individuals, but from the whole community. I think there's so much more support if you talk about speed as a livability issue. Now, I understand it's very much about the urban areas, but it actually fits also in so many parts, especially where people live. And they live out there as well. The other thing related to this sort of zooming out is that it's not only the sort of the government that should take, or the political system, or the local governments that should take the debate. The 2030 agenda, as you know, the strategic development goals, that's now a part of what we all do in the community, also invites the private sector to be the sort of equal partner to long-term, to sustainability of our community, which means they should support, they should in their value chains, and especially, you know, big corporations in their value chains, start to look at their safety footprint, to see what kind of things they sort of create or can do in the community, which means, of course, that any sort of commercial type of traffic, whether it is in a commercial or in a passenger car for traveling for duty or something like that, they have a very big role in making sure that we have a sustainable community in relation to safety, to climate, to livability, to the feeling of security and things like that. So you would expect the whole private sectors to stand behind having sort of the right speeds out there in the community. I think this is so important, and I think this study would support that to an extent that we can talk about, we know the facts. Please take them on board and make sure, but also invite all the allies out there, especially from,
There's some great observations. I actually would like to get Michael Newstead to respond to that from the point of view of the TAC. Michael?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to suppose bring it to the rural road, and Victoria has perhaps different from many other countries. We have such valuable environmental resource on the side of our rural roads. Our trees are there all on the roadside, and then you've got paddocks where they've all been cleared. So we've got this choice we need to make. We can have speed, we can have safety, we can have trees, but we can't have all three of those together. And we've had a community, there's several examples of this, but we've had a community that did realise that as a safety response, our government solution was, let's remove the trees, because surely speed can't be reduced. That's not on the table. We can remove the trees and then we can deal with the trauma. But the community realised, hang on.
How did that go for you, Michael?
Sorry, how did that go?
How did that go?
It was a challenge. I had a very heated discussion. I copped some heat, let's say, from someone who loved the trees, and they was able to let her know that I love the trees as well. It's not a contest between trees and safety. You can have trees and safety, but you can't have speed as well. But this group had figured it out, and they started then to call on the government to have an 80 speed limit. So I think the study here gives us that opportunity to inform the debate a bit more. Community needs to be able to decide. They don't have all the information, and I think that's a real problem. And then give them a bit of information about the level of safety that comes with a certain level of speed. Start to challenge some of their assumptions about what they can do with their own driving prowess and their ability to avoid an accident or to break their way out of trouble. And recognise that there's more at play here. It's not a simple speed and driver behaviour kind of question. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I wanted to turn, if I could, Michael Fitzharris, to one part of your research, which indicated that what the 5-star safety rating car gave you, but also what it didn't give you, and how it wasn't sort of the complete solution to the problem that I think many consumers might think that it is. Is something strange or interesting psychologically happening with us, where when we get into that often sometimes quite luxuriously appointed, or at least very solid feeling car with, you know, airbag, 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 airbag all around us, is it giving us that false sense of security? And do we need to deal with that somehow?
No, I think one of the most important things is we've got to be really careful. People have to continue to buy 5-star cars. This study doesn't say that at all. I think it shows the opposite. People must continue to buy 5-star cars and supports ANCAP, Euro ANCAP and so on. What is really clear though is that for people who are currently driving that car at the speed limits that are set in the road environments we have, it's just misaligned. So we know that for people who are even compliant with the speed limit, when an impact speed does happen, they're just simply not writing off enough speed. You don't have time. And I think that's something that's really important. So we're having impacts just outside of the design parameters of the car to protect them from serious injury. That's the mismatch. It doesn't mean... So the key point is, yes, that's exacerbated for people who are exceeding the speed limit, but when the speed limits are mismatched to the car, it starts to be a really significant problem that even the 5-star car can't support, and I think that's a key takeout for me, and surprising that so many of the vehicles that are designed at an incredibly high standard, when you're hit by the wrong thing at the wrong point of the car at the wrong speed, you're not guaranteed of protection, and people would expect that. And I think that's the message how we have to start to communicate that by joining the dots, by saying that, you know, this is how it all strings together, not just we need to lower speed limits, but we need to understand why. And the 5-star car finding really demonstrates why. It gives the reason to do that, and that's the key.
Michael Fitzharris, just staying with you for a moment, Nicholas Hunter has asked a question that I'd like to get a brief answer from, and then we'll get to the other panellists on some other issues. And Nicholas asks, regarding the control arm responses, 33%, I recall, says Nicholas, is there any possibility for bias regarding common personality or demographic characteristics amongst the respondents? And would this have any impact on the findings?
Yeah, it's a really good point. What we're interested in at the moment is speed, so the speed that's measured. So we have accounted for driver age and driver sex, but what was interesting is that the people who responded to the survey were travelling slightly faster than the non-responders, which was a bit surprising because you would actually think it would be the opposite. So in a sense, we sort of have a bit of a defence to that. But responders to surveys in a third are always a little bit different perhaps, but our outcome variable is the speed of the vehicle. And as we say, the responders on average were travelling up to 1 kilometre, depending on the crash site. Actually faster than the non-responders, which sort of adds strength to the nature of the study. And had we used the full range, from a technical point, had we used the full range of vehicles that we measured, our result may actually have been higher than the 25% for 3 kilometres over, which is sort of interesting as well. And there's a lot of technicality around the reconstruction process and the conservative nature, and we did that. And, you know, that's something. But what I will say, I know Michael Hardiman asked a question earlier. Event data recorders was a major part of the study when we first started that we were hoping for. So the black box, which is connected to the airbag system, that's something that really I'd like to see regulated. And I know from a major collision group enforcement point of view, having that objective data is the way around that. But, you know, our crash reconstruction process is you know, we're very confident with what we've done. So it's a really critical question, and the speed and travel, speed and crash risk curves are really, really important. And it's actually a really important question.
I want to go to Michael Newsteig for a moment. There's a question here from Liz Cairns about the thoughts around where prevention investments are best targeted, looking at the research that Michael has just revealed today. Michael Newsteig, can you give us a response to that, where you think prevention investments now arising from this are best targeted?
Yeah, I think it's captured. I think, Michael, you made the point in the study, in the presentation. It really is about balance. And then again, Michael pressed to give one example, one area. You cannot solve this. You can have the perfect road system, and you're still going to have a problem. You need to drive good behaviour. You can have perfect cars, but you still need to have the good system, the good road system with the speed limit set appropriately. So, in making our investment decisions, we have to think about all the elements of the system. We also have to think about the rate at which we can change things. So you invest in an enforcement campaign and you do clear public education around that, you get a very quick response. And so that's something that will every now and again we'll put some will really boost that, and you'll see a very quick response in the behaviour, and the trauma numbers will come down as well. But then you've got your TAC being a very long tail, slow scheme where we'll be paying out people's compensation for injured people today for 50 years. It's really important we have an eye to the long game as well, and that's about investing so that the road system, maybe it's 30 years' time, that it reaches those performance criteria that we've identified we need to get to. So it's definitely a balance, and it's a timing question as well. And then you'll talk to your actuaries and work out, and your finance people work out what's the best cash flow, and at what point do we stop investing in wire rope barrier and start investing in vehicle schemes or the like. There are many factors in there, but the simplest answer is balance.
Klaus, I'm going to come back to you. Arising from this research, where do you think the critical policy priorities are?
Well, I have to agree to what everyone else saying, is that sort of you have to work on the whole thing at the same time. I mean, I saw many of the cases. I see solutions for example, intersections that really, they will never work. Whatever vehicles you put there, whatever you will do to the humans out there on enforcement, it will never work. But you can also see sort of the vehicle fleet, and which takes time, of course. It takes time to replace it, although infrastructure takes even more time, but takes time to replace it. But of course, you can see now with the fantastic development we have of vehicles, that it is so important to look at what comes in as a new vehicles, and especially look at the big fleet buyers, because they do decide a lot of what you get into a country. And it is really the importers. It's not only the manufacturers, it's the importers of the vehicles who really plays the big role. The technology is there, but you can always sort of, either de-specify or increase. So looking at the commercial buyers. But if you then go to sort of, if I may call it so, the way we drive out there, I'm constantly coming back to that. And we can see it maybe more pronounced here in Europe and in Sweden. If you look at who drives fastest in Sweden, you would see that number first, that would be the couriers. The next one would be the taxis. The next one would be, and then you have a whole list of them. And in the end comes the retired, whatever, yeah. It's so important to start looking at who is behind, and not look at the individuals, but rather looking at sort of who creates the situation and who can control it. And you constantly get back to that. It's organizations, because they are the ones who set the norms in the community, not individual behavior. Don't look at that. Look at the norms, because we are copycats out there. So look at what you do to them rather. And they have organization. It's probably better to go to a few CEOs than to go to all the individuals working for them in their value chain. So I'm coming back to that. But you need to work on every one of them. And I think this great study really supports that you can't just look at one thing. It doesn't work like that. Thanks.
It's interesting how our brains as humans always go to just give me the solution, give me the 3-word slogan we're very accustomed to here in Australia in particular. But I don't think I got a response from that specific question from you, Soames, and I'd love that as well. And it doesn't have to be one, but just what the critical policy priorities are from this research.
Thank you, Virginia. And I think you hit the nail on the head about we want the 3-word slogan that's going to solve it all, and there isn't one. I think Stuart and Klaus's answers around balance are right, but I would add a dimension to why the balance, and that is it's not just about the fast response things. Yes, we can get a fast response to something like enforcement and those kinds of changes, partly because it's fast, but also partly because we can hit the whole state at once. If you change the law and you ramp up the enforcement, you can get to all of Victoria at once. If you start doing engineering, as Klaus was pointing out, intersection by intersection or road by road, you don't get an overall change in Victoria at once, but you gradually build up a more and more sustainably safe environment. And to me, it's very important to focus on that as part of the balance, because that's how you'll eventually get a safe system. And yes, it does cost more to start, but bear in mind, it's sustainable. Once you've put in a good barrier, once you've corrected a bad intersection to be a good roundabout, it sustains itself. You don't have to keep investing. If you keep doing behaviour change, you have to keep doing the enforcement, you have to keep rolling out the programs, you have to keep having the battles. So I think the long-term solution to delivering the safe system, which is deliverable, and I think Victoria will achieve it first in Australia, is to maintain the investment in those sustainable outcomes long-term by investing in the system.
Okay, it's an interesting question there. I did want to come back to you, Michael Fitzharris, just with a couple of summarising points, because we're almost completely out of time. But there's a question here from Mark Stevenson, and Klaus, it might be good for you to reflect on this. But Robin, I'm mindful that I haven't heard from you in a while, so I'd like to hear your reflection too. And this from Mark Stevenson: we're currently moving into a connected and automated transport system, with the role of mobility as a service playing a large part in the new system. What can we take from a study like this to inform the future, acknowledging that this study is calibrating the current system?
It's a really important question. Thanks, Mark. I think one of the things the study shows is the importance of vehicle technology and the role that the technology can play. Of course, there are grand ambitions for totally autonomous vehicles, which I think the bubbles burst, but I think connected ITS is a really important part, and that progression as that rolls through. Some of the technology, say for example on an S-Class Mercedes, really starts to connect the pieces together, and that's of course in the highest end. We need to make sure that technology is available quickly. But certainly that CITS and mobility as a service, I think we're some years away, but I think it will transform our road transport system as we currently see it, and we need to be ready for that challenge, and that's an important part of our next generation. The time frame of that, I don't know. I've never been terribly convinced by fully autonomous vehicles. I think I'll be 2060 and I won't be on this earth by the time that happens. It does the easy things well. It does the more challenging things a lot harder that humans actual process. And I think we're 90% there on the fully autonomous car. That last 10% will take a very long time. I'm yet to be convinced. But the cooperative ITS and mobility as a service, yes, that's coming. And we need to think about how we make our road transport system. And there is a final point. We've spoken a lot about rural roads. 67% of our crashes occurred in urban areas. And, you know, we can't forget that that's been a major part. And just because, you know, it's a third and not 67% have an MO3 plus injury, these people are still severely injured, and we need to think about the urban form, and that's where the mobility as a service and the cooperative ITS will be really important as we move forward. And we simply can't forget that, because that's where we live, we work and we play.
Robin, can I get you to respond to that question about our future as an automated system and how this research fits into that?
So the technology that is the base technology that will inform automated vehicles in the future, it gives us some really important technology in terms of what that means in protecting our community now. So things like auto emergency braking, lane keep assist, even things like adaptive cruise control. All of those technologies are actually really important in starting to create a safer system for us now. So the development and supporting the development of those and bringing those forward is incredibly important. It is useful and important also to have an eye for the future and what that might look like. And so some of the pieces of research, like the research that Mark is leading, plus some of the other work where through Bosch, we're looking at how these sorts of highly technical vehicles respond to our rural road network, is obviously really helpful in starting to think about some of this technology and the value that it might provide in helping deal with the trauma on our lower class roads, and what that might mean in terms of how we prepare those roads to capitalise on those opportunities, whether it's line marking or signage or other sorts of things. So I think we need to have an eye for the future, but we also need to think about what that technology provides us now and in the next 5 and 10 years' time.
Now, I never, ever like finishing over time, and we're dangerously at that point now. But I did want to get a very quick, and it has to be quick, just final observation from all of you, if I can, given the terrific research you've now been up close and personal with. I'll actually start with you, Michael Newsteig, if I can. Just a quick final summation from you.
Look, I think we've got a conversation going now. I just really implore the road safety community right across Australia and internationally, get in touch and be part of this journey and this the translation of this research into action. Thanks.
Terrific. Soames?
Thank you. From my point of view, Virginia, there is a global point here, which I'd also like to highlight. So, I'm the head of road safety for the World Bank. We focus on low and middle income countries. They suffer 93% of the world's deaths. And I think this study has a very particularly powerful relevance in that often when you talk to the minister of those countries or the treasurer, they will say, no, I don't want to see road safety now. Help me with my economy. I want to become a high income country, then I can solve road safety. And part of the value of this study is highlighting the extreme cost of crashes now. And so it helps us mount the argument back to those countries to say, no, start dealing with road safety now, because that's one of the things stopping you becoming a high income country. Start dealing with road safety now. This kind of research helps us mount that kind of argument. And I'm really glad to have TAC in that global space as well. I think that's going to be a really valuable part of this study.
Klaus, final response from you?
Yeah, for all of those who believes that facts is really the major thing to run our world, I think this is a fantastic thing that's happened. So be proud, Victoria, be proud, TAC, and all those who have been involved, and Michael and all the others as well. This is great for us all in the world. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Good on you, Klaus. Robin?
One of the things we've really struggled to do is reduce serious injury trauma. And this report is really important in helping us better understand that trauma and look to see how we respond to that to ensure that not only are we pushing down our fatalities, but also our serious injuries.
Robin, thanks so much. And the final word belongs to you, Michael Fitzharris. This was your terrific research.
It's a product of all of the team and the people who've committed their time when they were seriously injured and their families. So I guess we owe it to them to do everything we can to make good our promise to translate into action now. And I guess we've provided step one, and step two is turning it into action and saving lives and reducing serious injury trauma on our roads. And that's our hope, and that's what MUARC does, and that's what Monash wants. So I'd just like to thank everyone, the TAC, and for everybody today, and the support that I've received over the years, and from Michael Newsteig as well, who's just been a rock. So I think now is the time to act, and I think that's something that we have to take forward. So in a sense, I handball it across to the policy makers, and we have to keep working together to, make sure everyone gets home safely every time.
Well, they certainly can't say after research like this that they haven't been told. So, as you say, over to the policymakers. Please thank our terrific panellists this afternoon, Michael Fitzharris, Michael Newsteig, Klaus Tingvall, Soames Job and Robin Seymour. Thank you to all of you. And that ends our time together this afternoon. Thanks to everyone for Zooming in and to all the panellists for making their very precious time available to these terrific conversations. A link is going to be sent to you to the MUAC website for that report in about a week or so. The timing will align with when it's going to be released to the media. I've got no idea when that's going to be, but it will be in a week or so you won't miss out. It'll be sent to you. And I'm being told there's more research coming your way as well in 2021. So what we've learnt from this should get more profound in the next year as well, which would mean there are even fewer places to hide from the realities that have been pointed out by this research. Thanks for having me involved. I'm always delighted to speak about issues of road safety, and hopefully we can all end up being a safer community and welcome everyone we love home at the end of the day. Thanks for being here. Have a safe and happy weekend, and we'll see you soon. Thanks so much, everyone.